and welcome to Unit 3. So, in this unit, we're going to be talking about kind of the period after the French Revolution. So, the Napoleonic era, Napoleonic era, um, industrialization, and kind of the social unrest and changes that came from that, right? Uh, we read about the French Revolution in the last unit. We're probably pretty much all familiar, at least to some point, with Napoleon Bonaparte. And he emerged out of the revolution to become one of the most significant French rulers ever, actually. And he was a very contradictory person. He fought for the revolution, he believed in the principles of the French Revolution. And in his attempts to conquer Europe, he exported many of these ideals of the revolution to other places in Europe, thereby undermining the traditional roles of the power structures that were in place. On the other hand, he was very ambitious. He used his power to benefit himself and his family. He appointed family members, to an example is he appointed his brother as king of Spain, but he did that in a lot of different cases too, right? And he reversed many of the rights or things that the revolution had done, like the rights that women had achieved. And he did that to strengthen his alliance with the Catholic Church because that was going to help him maintain peaceful control over France, right? So he was born in Corsica, not even in France, and evidently he got a lot of flack about his Corsican accent when he spoke French. But he gained fame for his role in putting down a royalist insurrection in Paris in 1795. And then he went on to lead French armies to a number of major victories over the next few years. And in 1799, he joined a conspiracy to seize power in France. And by 1804, he was the only one left standing of the, I think, three original ones, and he crowned himself Emperor of France. His reign was characterized by building the largest army at the time. It was over 1 million soldiers by 1812 to support his conquest of overtaking and controlling all of Europe. He was defeated by the British in 1805 in the Battle of Trafalgar, but that was not even the end. So the next couple of years, he had more victories, giving him control of Europe, basically from France to Poland. He had made a treaty with Russia at the time, but we'll see later he wants to get Russia anyway because it's so big, right? He was influential in the civil realm. He made changes to economic institutions, to education. He made that, I refer to it, the Concordat with the Pope, to restore the Catholic Church to France. He wrote a legal code that is, in fact, even the basis of the laws in Louisiana to this day. Great Britain continued to be a problem. When he was defeated at Trafalgar, he was trying to invade Britain. Didn't work. So he instituted what he called the Continental System, which basically said all of you European nations are to close your ports to British commerce. Don't trade with them. Well, most of them did that, but it didn't work. And from there, things started to kind of fall apart for him. He invaded Spain, and he found himself engaged in guerrilla warfare, which was not his strong suit. So his soldiers got kind of mired down in all of that. He still wanted to overtake Russia, so he marched. In the summer of 1812, he took 600,000 soldiers and marched to Russia. By October, he was forced to retreat. And the opposition, the coalition of Austria, Prussia, Russia, Britain, I think that's all, they basically reformulated themselves and were able in April of 1814 to force him to abdicate. He was sent to exile on the island of Elba in the Mediterranean, but within a year he had escaped and his army, who was still very loyal to him, helped him. And they met up with him when he returned to the mainland. He returned to France. He took over for a while. He ended up being recaptured and imprisoned, then finally at St. Helena, which was an island in the South Atlantic, and that's where he died. Okay, so at the same time, we're seeing, or maybe right after it, I'd have to review the timeline, but at any rate, industrialization, which is really an important topic because it basically created our modern world. So it began in England around the middle of the 18th century. So yeah, it did overlap, 1750, around in there, right? Um, Spreading over the next century to other parts of Western Europe and the United States. So the advantage that these places that I just mentioned in Europe, Western Europe and the United States had was fuel, okay, especially coal. So coal wasn't new. People knew about coal, had been using coal for a long time, but it was new. It was different, the degree that it was being used starting in the 18th century. By this time, Britain had cut down its forests. And they cut down, they used some for fuel, but they also built ships and other houses and buildings and stuff like that. So it became very expensive to bring trees, timber over from their colonies. And so they turned to coal. Okay. Um, the first industry other than coal mining, obviously, to benefit from the use of coal was the textile industry. So mining and textiles were then followed by transportation, especially railroads, but then eventually steamships. Okay. So railroads, both for the transportation of people, raw materials, and finished products, brought dramatic changes. It brought cultural changes like time zones, the telegraph. Now people could travel further from home, and they had access to products that they didn't have before because they could be brought in with trains and then ultimately steamships. Okay, and these brought huge amounts of people into the cities to work in factories. Living and working conditions were horrible. And you can read about those in the documents, right? Workers lived in cheap tenements that had no water, no sanitation. Women and children worked in the mines and in the factories until the second half of the century, when finally people started to get outraged about this and bring things up to the government. And finally, they started to they had hearings and pass laws to protect the women and the children. But they were used extensively because they were paid less and because they were small. And so their hands could reach into, to get the tangles out of the textile machines, and children could go down into the mines because they were small. And this was all really awful, right? I think it was really awful. We also see new social classes evolving to replace the traditional nobility and serfs of the Middle Ages. So the middle classes became wealthier, and they sought to have the same privileges as the old nobility. The working classes were considered to be a little better than animals. They were lazy, they drank too much. I mean, that's what people would say about them, right? That's how they characterize them. But there were people who were concerned about the welfare of the workers, and others who were kind of angry that this small group of people, relatively small, were becoming wealthy on the labor of these very poorly treated workers. So we start seeing social movements that I'm going to talk about in a minute rising, such as socialism, that advocated that the government could do a better job of protecting the welfare of the common people. Okay, so political ideologies, and that's the last section that you're going to be reading about. So the big changes, the French Revolution, Napoleonic Wars, Enlightenment, all of those led many people to question the purposes of the government, the role of religion, what rights should men and women have, etc. They were just asking all these questions. And so we see the emergence of various ideologies or isms. Okay. Now, well, I'll wait till I get down there to say this. But okay, so one is conservatism, and it basically upholds the old traditions as being the best and most desirable. We're better off if we keep monarchies, we keep traditional governments, we keep women in their place, we keep the church as being a powerful influence on society, etc. Right? Nationalism becomes probably one of the most important, if not the most important force in Europe from this period through the 20th century. And actually, there are historians who will argue that the 30 Years' War that you read about last unit started out as a war about religion and it ended up being the first war about nationalism. So you can trace it back that far, but it continues to become even more important and really important during the Napoleonic era. So it's this idea that there are essential characteristics that people share, and that people should live together with those other people who share these same characteristics, whether they, and these include things like ethnicity, religion, language, folk stories, music, etc. Okay. And yet we know people have been moving around so much throughout all of history that it's kind of hard to find those people that you're best suited to be living with, right? Liberalism is not the same thing as what we talk about as liberals here. It's based on Enlightenment ideas of reason, rationality, and progress. The term at that point in time, was talking about these ideas, and that's the best way to kind of arrange your government and to arrange your society. They were generally middle classes or professional classes, and they were usually educated. Okay. I'm pretty sure I have some videos. If not, I'll look and make sure I do. But there's some videos by a philosopher who talks about liberalism, or liberal with a capital L, versus liberal as we talk about it, right? I don't think we've gotten to a capital L yet. Anyway, socialism. Now, your book differentiates a little bit between socialism and communism. And some books put them all together and then say there are two different kinds, right? But socialism is this idea that things have gotten to be kind of out of hand, and we need to, especially with industrialization and the realities that the working classes are facing. So not everybody was in agreement. Karl Marx wrote about socialism, but I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But there were a group of so-called utopian socialists who advocated changes from within the existing system. And those are people like Fournier and some of the other people that you'll read about who advocated, that we can just make these changes, we can create these towns, or whatever, right? And communism is the ideas that were advocated by Karl Marx in his Communist Manifesto. So he outlines the history of class struggle and concludes that the world had reached the time for workers to rise up, eliminate all classes, and then everybody could share equally in the modes and means of production. So these ideas grew out of the Enlightenment, out of industrialization, and out of urbanization. Anyway, if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll look forward to reading your thoughts about all of these topics. Thanks.